Hey everyone, it's Bob. Welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. Today I'm joined by Colette Mason, tech veteran, AI builder and trainer, and author of Ditch, Rework, Build, Teamwork, 10 AI Principles to Fix the Friction and Build a Trusted AI Assistant. With nearly 40 years of experience in computing, starting from age 14, mind you, and a background in understanding human behavior through coaching and neuro-linguistic programming, Colette brings a grounded people-first perspective to how we think about AI. We explore the promises and pitfalls of automation, how to design responsibly with humans in mind, and what it really means to work with AI instead of just delegating tasks to it. Colette's insights are honest, relatable, and they challenge the hype to elevate the conversation around AI. In the show notes of the episode, you'll find links to Colette's website, which has a bunch of great resources, many of them free, and a link to her book. So don't forget to check out those links. As always, thanks for tuning in. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver. With me today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Colette Mason. How you doing today, Colette?
I'm very good, thank you.
Thanks for being here.
No problem.
Yeah, there's a lot that I'm curious about your background and some of the projects that you're working on, and certainly some of your insights and observations of what's going on in the exciting world of AI these days.
Yeah.
So just to kick things off, why don't you give us a little bit about your background and what you're working on now?
Okay, so I'm Colette Mason. I live in London. I've worked in IT all my life since I was 14 because I was really keen and I really loved it. And I've worked on lots of big projects for government and Metropolitan Police in London, national broadcasters. So I've done lots of high profile projects. And in the last 10 years or so, I've worked a lot more with smaller companies because they're a bit more fun than corporates.
Yeah, that has been my experience as well. So what kind of problems is this about like AI strategy? Is it specific, project work? Are you building stuff on their behalf? Is it consulting?
Yeah. So what I've decided to do is I didn't think AI was good enough for full-on automation right now. Not when you're working on your own business sort of thing. There isn't enough hours in the day. And you can't police it. And if you do have to police it, it kills your mojo for some other task that you don't really want to do either. So I decided I wasn't really interested in the automated stuff and I'd be much more of a sounding board and a collaborator and taking the strain off somebody. So I model people's brains because I'm a hypnotherapist and a master NLP practitioner, certificate junkie. And so I understand people pretty well. And I've had 40 years experience in computing. So I could bring the two together really well. And that suited me more than automation. And I see a lot of overpromising with automation, like let's have 500 discovery calls this week. And you think, well, I haven't got time to talk to 500 people and do the other things. And there's all these empty promises that people are getting influenced by and hurt by, I think, in terms of their expectations. So I wanted to be the voice of reason a little bit because I'd done so much computing for so long. I thought, yeah, let's help with this.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that this latest wave of AI, of generative AI, has now been sort of thrust upon, the average person, certainly people that have no technical knowledge or skills whatsoever. And so it's kind of created quite an interesting scenario where, I guess if we think about other waves of adoption of different technologies, this one is off to a relatively interesting but messy start.
I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword because it uses natural language, which gets rid of a big technical barrier. And it also opens up a whole can of worms. If you don't understand, you need to make your data private and not use it to train the model and things like that. They're tiny little things, but they make a huge difference to what you're doing. And I think it's easy to make some mistakes along the way that matter quite a lot.
Yeah. And I think part of it also is, I know we're gonna get into the weeds here, but like the literacy, part of the literacy is, well, I guess I would say the AI literacy is multifaceted, right? It's not just skills, it's not just specific tools, it's mindset, it takes this iterative, learning process of interacting in that natural language.
Yeah.
Which we're starting to see shift from text-based to voice-based and things like that. But on the automation piece, I feel like because a lot of people, unless you were in IT or you took it upon yourself like you did to just sort of learn, be curious and learn these things on your own, you you just sort of jumble everything into this big AI bucket, right? And so I was just having a conversation on LinkedIn about this yesterday, where everyone is just like, the workflow piece that's not, it's not agentic, it's not even really using what we would consider AI necessarily. It's really just like workflow automation, and that's where a lot of people are focusing, because they think it's like, I guess, the low hanging fruit, or they think it's quicker to see, noticeable ROI in some sense, and so that's where they're focusing. But in another sense, you're still just scratching the surface, and you're still not really applying AI in the way that we think it's going to disrupt, businesses, and that we need to sort of redesign even how
Yeah.
our organization is structured. So I thought we could dig
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of repositioning, and there's things that will be just done with things like Zapier and Make, where they're literally just shunting parcels of data from one place to another. People are saying this is AI. Well, it's not really, is it? It's definitely automation, and I think a lot of people want to get rid of the grunt work, and so they actually need automation, but they're not searching for that. They think, I want to use AI to do these tasks for me, because a human person sat across the desk would be doing that for me. And that's when it starts to unravel a bit. And I think they get overcharged quite a lot for some of the basic things that's just shunt, things like booking calendar appointments and then having it block out in your diary and things like that. That's not AI at all, but some people like to think it is.
Yeah. I mean, I will concede that, some of those things you want to kind of get out of the way. It's almost like just peeling back some of the layers to get to the meatier, things, right? And if we don't get rid of some of the things that are time consuming, then we don't necessarily have the bandwidth and the capacity to
Yeah. Yeah.
spend our time in those deeper activities. So I understand it's sort of this necessary step, but it just, I need people to understand, and I'm curious to get your perspective, but it just seems like I want people to understand that this is what you're working on is important, but
Yeah.
it is not the highest value, scenarios that we're talking about. And you need to know that this is a precursor, in some cases a prerequisite, to getting to, the meat of the
Meatier
problem.
things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to describe what you do as a human being. If you say, well, how do you walk and how do you breathe? And there's obviously lots of steps to that, but you can't really describe it because it's on autopilot. And they think, well, how do I run this business? How does that actually work? And you've got so much experience and unconscious knowledge about how it works, and inference and body language and intonation of voice, lots of extra clues that we've got that the machine hasn't got. So it makes it more difficult to get some of those subtler things right, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask you about your book,
Yes.
Ditch, Rework, Build, Teamwork.
Yes. Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the themes and the audience and all that?
Yeah, I was inspired by a book back in 2004, which was about making websites nicer to use. Steve Krug wrote a book called Don't Make Me Think, and it was making your website customer friendly. And it was brilliant. It was really, really good. And I thought, I can see the same problems with AI. People are sort of building AI for themselves and forgetting the customer or forgetting the wider purpose. You sort of build your first website just to say, well, I've registered a domain and I've put some stuff on it. It's a pretty low bar. And I feel it's the same with AI. There's lots of, I'm going to build this assistant and it's going to do all these lovely things for me. But it was coming back to, it isn't really as good as it could be. So I thought, well, why don't we take those principles that Steve gave, those 10 principles, and we'll apply them to AI, putting people back in control of what it's doing and how. And I started off with the basic things like, you've got to ask it instructions properly. Otherwise, it's not going to give you the right answer. But equally, it can't hide behind that. Your system that you're building has to read the room. It can't just, oh, well, I didn't have all the information, mate. Sorry. No, you've got to educate it so you can really work in partnership. And then I took it on from there. I thought, well, what are the other things that AI does wrong? Or, and then the slow creep of it going slightly off track. And then 4 hours in, you think, this isn't what I started. So I put all those things in there to help regular people. And people have said, wow, this isn't a business book and it isn't a book for nerds. It's actually a book for real people. Because with 40 years in computers, I know that frozen rabbit look when you go, oh, you've got to do something, and they've never done it before. And they go, oh my God, I can't do that. And so I knew I'd be with the frozen rabbits. So I had to make it fun. So it's got lots of stories. Oh, sorry. It's got lots of stories and metaphor and stuff like that to make it so they understand that you don't need computing knowledge to understand the problem, because I thought that's going to be a big problem. So the
Right.
10 principles came from there.
So this is about, identifying the real crux
Yeah.
of the problem and making sure that you're not
Yeah.
sort of spinning your wheels or reinventing.
Yeah. And the collaborative side of it, I think, because if you're not very technically minded, as we said before, building those technical automated solutions is quite difficult. And you've got to be doing parsing and syntax and all those things that people might think, well, what's that? So I thought, well, the typing things in the chat box, they can definitely do. Like they can buy a book off Amazon. It's pretty low level computing skills. And so I think, well, those are the people who need this help the most. It's not the people watching the YouTube bros and looking at the benchmarks. They're fine on their own. It's the regular people who need to get that blog post written so they can make it to their kids, school theatre or whatever. That's what they need AI for, and not so much for this academic pursuit. And that's another reason why I chose to make it for regular people.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think part of what I've seen is people really are at very different sort of starting points and are on this journey at
Yeah.
perhaps different speeds. And so I think it can be challenging to really figure out what is the best way to sort of raise the bar for everyone, because it's sort of uneven. But I think if you meet people where they are and you give them, like you said, some metaphors, some relatable, sort of scenarios to get them to think a little bit more deeply about what they're trying to accomplish, and maybe look inward and say, this is something that I can handle, right? I'm not learning to code. I'm not learning to be a data scientist. I'm not learning I'm not going down a technical discipline, path. This is just part of the evolution of how humans and machines interact in a way.
I tried to relate it to hiring a real human being. You give them, you look through a bunch of CVs and you see how they got the industry knowledge and the skills that roughly I need. And I think of that as that if you've made an assistant, that's your system prompt. It sort of says, this is what you do from 9 to 5 or I'll sack you. And then you've got the kind of the company Bible, that folder that they give you on your first day that's about that thick, and it's got everything from sick pay to holidays to where the canteen is. It's all in there, and that makes you a functioning person in that environment. And then you get to instructions, then you get to prompting. That's kind of the third thing. Without those two earlier bits in place, then you have to be really, really specific, and the AI can't read the room, and that's when you get disappointed, and you need prompts that Tolstoy would be proud of, because it's like 3 meters of prompt to get it to do one thing. And, so by giving it those first two bits, you can avoid that big problem, because nobody can remember that. It's like when I do Duolingo and it gives me a really long sentence to do, I think I can only do 5 words and you want me to do like 15. This is going to go really wrong. And it's the same with the prompts. And then the feedback is the other thing. I see people, if you ever watched comedy shows, there's a curmudgeon who just gets really wound up about everything and just fumes and doesn't explain why it's not working for them, and as humans, we understand why they're angry, but the creator's not going to know. And so I just see it going, not like that. That's not what I wanted. I wanted it. You should have done it differently. Well, what is differently? And I think, and that's if you get those 4 pieces right, then it's much easier to tame it and have it on your side rather than reaching for the antacid pills.
Right. Right. I had an intern this summer, and I feel like it's given me sort of this new appreciation for this concept of, talking to your AI or training your AI like an intern, or like someone who just really doesn't have their bearings in terms of the technology that we're using. I mean, yes, this person is a young adult. He's been using computers. They're, still, even at 20 or so years old, they're still probably a digital native, right? They probably still had a tablet in their hand. Think every screen is a touch screen, kind of perception. But when it comes to some of the things that I, wanted this person to work on, I still needed to be very deliberate in how I was describing, and not assume that they had used any particular application before. I didn't even assume that they had used ChatGPT before. Luckily, they had.
Yeah.
Because school gave them a paid account to a couple of the conversational AI tools. But yeah, I mean, I feel like as I'm writing system instructions for my custom GPTs, or even just regular prompts, I don't necessarily follow anybody's sort of formula or the acronym that they use to make sure you're adding all the, context and role and,
Format. Yeah.
expectation. Yeah. I don't necessarily follow anybody's acronym. I mean, to me, a lot of that was, I don't know, some of it is just common sense. Like,
Yeah.
how could it possibly know, how could it possibly give me the answer that I want especially in like a one shot, prompt if I don't give it that context. Sometimes it surprises you and it
Yeah.
makes some assumptions based on its, probabilistic, algorithm. But yeah, no, I have a new appreciation for how people need to talk to it. I saw a quote yesterday that said, if you don't, if you're not good at like communicating with AI, then you're not good at managing people. I thought that was a little harsh, but I mean, maybe there's some truth to
Yeah. I
that,
suppose
right?
when you're a manager, you have to look from other people's perspectives, don't you? And I think there's an element of that with the AI when you sort of read and think, well, actually, if I read that back, I wouldn't have understood what I wanted either. I think being able to look at things from other perspectives is quite helpful, and focusing on deliverables rather than just doing things for the sake of it. I think managers are a bit more attuned to not doing busy work. They want to get things signed off on time, particularly project managers, that sort of person. So yeah, I think I could see it both unraveling
Yeah,
or both
yeah.
working.
I wanted to talk about like human centricity
Mm,
and all the things that we're building. I mean, you're helping people, build solutions that solve some of their challenges, but I know you take great care when you do so, and you get them to think about, some of these broader issues, that this isn't just not just building a technical solution just as a gee whiz, look what this can do, but you actually give and help sort of teach people, like, to have the forethought to think about, human centric, design, being responsible by design, and then, responsible use. I thought we could talk about that a
yeah,
bit.
yeah. I see a lot of people going, "Hey, why don't you build an assistant and put it in the ChatGPT store?" And these people aren't from a technical background particularly, and I can go into those things and cause absolute havoc as the mystery shopper from hell. And so I can go into them and I can say, I want to do all sorts of, behavior you shouldn't be doing, going on retreats and, doing crazy things that you shouldn't be doing that are dangerous. And it's telling me, yeah, I'll create all the social media posts for you for that. And I'm thinking, you kind of need, yes, it's great that it's keen to help, but not in that way. And it's a bit like you never brand an error message in a piece of software because your name gets associated with a bad thing, and you wouldn't want to have these GPTs out there being able to do dangerous things. So to give it an example, I said, I want to go on an anorexics retreat and we can all hide that we're not eating to our families. And it just went ahead and did that. It said, are you sure you want to do that? I said, oh yeah, totally sure. Sounds great. And this person's thing would let me do that. And there's another really well-known product that helps with automating podcast editing and stuff like that. And I went in and asked it about some murder sites in the UK and it told me about those. So it wasn't just about, how do I change the ratio of my videos? It would literally help me with anything. And it's nice that it wants to help you with anything. But I think that first step should be, is this a question about the software or billing or something like that? And then be as helpful as you like, but not early on, because it looks like you're endorsing that. People could portray it that you're endorsing that behavior and you're not particularly, you just forgot to close it off. And I don't think people think about that enough when they're encouraging people to start these things.
Right, right. I guess there's a lot of facets to human centricity, and some of it is some of those, design. Hopefully, there's still a design principle somewhere around, do no harm to
Yeah.
human beings. But I
Yeah.
think that it's more than just like sort of pressure testing it, and in the evaluation process, it's like, how are we? I guess I feel like there's still some design principles or that go back to, well, design thinking exercises to make sure you're understanding the experience of whoever the user is, but also going back to just basics of thinking about that there's a human, involved here. There's a human that might be being sort of judged, or if it's a decision making process. I guess I'm leaning towards the talent and HR space
Yeah.
now. Like, you want to make sure that, like, how does it help you make, more fair, decisions? Does it have different users in mind as in terms of interaction, right? Like I might not be, I don't mean like a human ability, accessibility perspective, but just even just thinking about people who might just have, maybe they're on the autism, spectrum, neurodiversity and things like that. So it just seems like there's a lot of things that people don't necessarily, think about as they design some of these things. They're just so excited to build something that works and
Yeah.
that other people can use, but they don't necessarily think about some of these things. I just think that's part of proper like AI literacy, is to have a sort of responsible AI and that human-centric, lens on top of
Yeah.
it.
And some of the things that apply to software back in the day, like being able to close pop-up windows and the user is sovereign and can control some of the features in the software, or you're able to see where it's got its answer from if you're using Excel with some long formulas and things. A lot of things are obscured because you just can't explain reasoning. The AIs weren't built to explain reasoning, and it's had to be bolted on later. And so for those high-risk industries, finance, insurance, it's going to be really hard to work out what they're doing and how you can use them properly, because I don't think it's necessarily built to do that right now.
Yeah. But I just think it's important that, however you incorporate it into any, AI literacy training or any, project work that's being done, that, this is part of.
Before we move on, I need to let you know about my friend Mark Pfeffer and his show, People Tech. If you're looking for the latest on product development, marketing, funding, big deals happening in talent acquisition, HR, HCM, that's the show you need to listen to. Go to the Work Defined Network, search up People Tech, Mark Pfeffer. You can find him anywhere.
Getting people to have that sort of appreciation, right? There's an ethical component to it, and ultimately, trustworthy solutions are going to win the day at the end.
You could use it for good in a way, just like the applicants are putting their CVs through and creating really customized CVs for a business.
Yeah.
You could customize the interview process. If you look on Glassdoor, lots of people talk about how awful the interviews were and this company felt terrible. Well, you could make your interview feel, if there was a really good candidate and you really wanted them to work with you, if you've personalized the interview and felt like you've really listened to them, then they'll probably pick you over the other company who didn't listen quite so much. So I think that could be quite a nice use for it, because you hear horror stories of everybody who applied when they were written down, everybody with blue ink. We're just not going to follow them because we haven't got enough time to read all these CVs, which is like, oh no. So you could probably use it to find, the candidates that fit your culture quite not, or whatever it is that you're looking for there, particularly if they've worked for a competitor that's, you'd want that knowledge from there, then that could be a good thing.
Yeah, AI is used throughout the talent life cycle for sure. And so it's interesting to see some of the reactions to some of the tools. I mean, certainly these are, I don't want to say controversial. I just think that there's things that we have to acknowledge, even as candidates. Maybe some candidates aren't comfortable talking to an AI in an interview, either whether that's just a phone call or it's an actual avatar, or some other mechanism where they're basically being sort of vetted by a
Yeah.
non-human.
Yeah.
I think that is off-putting to some, and we need to be careful that to my point earlier, like if it's someone who's, neurodiverse, or someone who has needs some type of accommodation, like maybe this isn't the best approach. They need to have an alternate way to get through that step. But more often and increasingly, I'm seeing people get quite comfortable with it, because I guess part of it is the alternative is silence, right? The
Yeah,
alternative is you
nobody
hear
listens.
absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I think it was Glenn Cathay from Randstad who put out a poll yesterday. So, which would you prefer of those two things? Would you prefer to talk to a human, have a nice conversation, and then literally hear nothing else, get completely ghosted after that, or talk to an AI, have a reasonably nice conversation with the AI if you can get over the initial, awkwardness or whatever, and then if you don't move forward, you get a full description of exactly why you're not moving forward. So which would you prefer, right? So when I was one of the early respondents to the to the poll, and so certainly not a representative sample at that point, but it was like 82% prefer the AI where you can actually get feedback. So people want feedback, and then I see it later in the process as well. If you make it to maybe one of the final stages, there's AI note takers, specifically for interviewers, right? And right now, those are just helping the hiring team, but you don't have to take notes. To your point earlier, like you get to, as an interviewer, you get to maintain eye contact, show the candidate that level of respect that you're truly, listening and not scribbling notes, trying to remember things and whatever. And it can mitigate some of the human bias. And so there's a lot of advantages to that, but still, some people might be, I don't know what the percentage of people that say, no, I don't want this interview recorded. I don't know what the objection is, but I suppose perhaps there's reasons why they might not want that to happen. But yeah, I just think it's, throughout that process, the talent acquisition process or the recruiting funnel, we're starting to see this more and more, and then this is particularly where we need to be careful around that human centricity and fairness and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'd definitely be in the hear back group, I think, out of the two, because at least you can improve, whereas if you don't hear anything, you're just stuck in it. I think it's more demoralizing, if you can't correct the problem, then especially if you're new to interviews just at a university, then, you need that feedback, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, you might apply to a different job at that same company again. You would want to know, what could I do differently to have a better, more favorable outcome, right? But then, yeah, give the candidate something to go with, because otherwise they're going to make the same mistake unknowingly. They're going to make the same mistake in every future, interview. So yeah, I as a candidate, I've gone through some of those assessments where it's just text based. I answered a couple of questions, and whether I move forward or not, I got a response with, it might have been sugar coated a bit, right? But it was still constructive, right? It was still informative and constructive. And so I remember exactly the job that I was applying for. I remember the company, and I continue to give them credit for being one of the earliest systems to actually do that. Because this was probably two or 3 years ago, before this whole AI interviewer, conversation came up again. Colette, I wanted to ask you, I know you have some some strong opinions and observations around like this, everything going on with like adoption, and because everyone can create something, they are creating something, and that something is probably either crap or it's like a shiny object and it's not well constructed. It's certainly not responsible by design, and so it's pretty ugly out there, as we talked about earlier. Just thought we could unpack that a little bit more and some of the observations that you have there.
I think I don't really like obvious AI content. It reminds me of banner ads. When banner ads first started on the internet, and there's these big shouty things going, buy my thing and 50% sale, and you needed your sunglasses on. A lot of it, I think people tune out of it really quickly now when it's just churned stuff. They just don't like it, and I don't think it's good for your reputation if you're doing that. I'd rather everybody did less stuff and put more of themselves into it than publish or look like you've died. It's like, the world's going to be awash with this kind of mediocrity. And so, I don't really like replacing yourself with it too much, or not letting on what you're doing. So when I wrote the book, I felt like a politician when they said, did you do drugs at university? And if you say no, half the people are going to think great. And if you say yes, half the other people are going to think great. No matter who I speak to, so I just said, yes, I did use it for editing, because it's really boring proofreading. I don't like proofreading, so I used it for that. The ideas are my own, and I bounced them around a bit. But yeah, it did help me a bit, but it was my stuff. And I thought, I'm going to have to, I didn't want to put it in, but one of the beta readers said, I think you ought to. So I'll hold my hands up. I've not wanted to mess up.
Yeah.
And I put it in there. So I think that's, and not checking, just waving things through. I think there's something like 40% of people often don't check what it's made. And because they're still thinking AI is like C3PO and kind of friendly and on your side, they forget that it's going to hallucinate. And it looks kind of plausible. It doesn't even look wrong. It looks plausible, like some of those legal cases where the stuff got deposited. And it looks good. And then you find out the cases don't exist, and neither does the judge that was presiding over it. And I think that, that's just waving it through, especially when you're tired or you're not very interested in what you're doing. If you're in a pretty dead-end job and you've got to just process these things, you're not really going to read what it makes. Even as a business owner, where your reputation hangs off what you've made, it gets tiring reading what it's made. I think there needs to be more of a check. Like when we used to publish things on the government website, one person would do it and then the other person would check it and make it live. And I think there needs to be a bit more, needs to slow down a little bit so it can stop making mistakes as much as it does. But then you sometimes have bun fights. I thought I would do that with one of my models. And I had, if you've seen Shark Tank, we've got a guy called Peter Jones on Dragon's Den. So I thought I'll have an AI Peter Jones in charge. He's always telling people how it's going to be and he's made millions. And then everybody just said, Peter, I'm not sure what to do now. Can you decide? And all the little agents just argued with each other and they didn't police. It wasn't this shiny new world where they said, oh, you've got that paragraph wrong and it would get fixed. They just ended up bickering. And I was like, that's not the answer. So what is this? So it's back to the drawing board. Another 3 months disappears, hammering around. What does this do? Yeah. So I think policing what it's doing is quite a challenge for people and companies because you've really got, if it's at scale, things like moderating. I mean, you're going to have, AIs moderating AIs because there's just too much stuff going on, especially if people go into content marketing like crazy. It's this wall of stuff.
You just made me think of some of those, there's some platforms that you can go to where it says like, well, use whatever, you can come here and use whatever model you want. And I don't mean like whatever ChatGPT model, like you can use, you access Claude, you can access Gemini, you can whatever. Like, do you go in and you have to pick one? Because that seems like the perfect spot to have these, the different ones like sort of duke it out and say, what's the consensus here?
Yeah, you can do things with the API and you can get a piece of information and send it to the next one to process. It thinks about it with some instructions and sends it back. So you can do that, especially for things like researching newsletters and things. You've got your source material that you said, I want this in the newsletter. That then gets cherry picked into a smaller digest, and then you check that it's still accurate. So things like that were quite easy to do. I think the other, and I use a tool called MindPal for that. That's really quite a good one. And you can say, I'd like my assistant to do this, and it will build a technical kind of assistant for you that will do all the data capture and moving things from one place to another. That's quite a nice tool for that, doing that sort of thing. It's quite intuitive. But the other problem is you sometimes see those things and you go, oh, have access to all the tools for life for $40. But what they really mean is something a bit like a browser where you can go to all the different platforms. You've still got to, like a mobile phone, you've still got to pay as you go to use the tool. So it's not really $40. It's $40 plus your AI charges. And
right.
It's like, $40 for life. Not sure it is.
That's also the life of the company, not your life.
Yeah, mayflies look like long-lived in comparison. Yeah.
that company could be dead by the end of the year.
Yeah.
So then you're just really out of luck. But yeah, no, it's really interesting. Yeah, I do get concerned. Because I spend so much time, either having these conversations or just in my advisory work, thinking about responsible AI and transparency and things like that. It's hard for me to use some of these approaches just because it seems like, as a solopreneur, I could use the help. There's plenty of things I'd like to take off my plate, but I don't want it to go out and represent me and pretend to sound like me. Like I just don't think we're there yet. I mean, yes, I have my own, digital twin. I have custom GPTs that know, a lot about me. I've got all the transcripts from all of these podcast conversations. Like it probably could do a decent job, but so far, some of the things that even like social posts around episodes, I always have to go in and manipulate. I mean, I can never take it at face value. Something doesn't sound right, or it was misinterpreted or lost context or something like that. So when I think about doing my own either automation or building agents, I got to be really careful because whether it's just responding to emails or crafting social posts or, looking through the show notes of these episodes. I mean, there's some areas where it's sort of safe, like people aren't expecting, a professional, author to write the show notes for every episode. So I'm glad that part is off my plate, but I still go in there and tweak things, even if it's just like misspellings or just things that are just sound really cliche or whatever. I try to, clean that stuff up, but I do like, I take like ethical use and responsibility and that kind of thing, very seriously, to your point earlier about like, at least show me that this was, how AI, helped me do this and whatever. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a sustainable pathway just because there's so much crap out there already and no one has declared it. So do I get bonus points for the transparency? I don't really care. I'll sleep better at night knowing that I was transparent in how I used it. But yeah, I think that authenticity is really important for people to maintain if they care about their own, reputation.
When you go to a website, and it's got one of the little chat bots in the corner, a lot of the times it'll say you're talking to Toby, like that's the Vodafone one, and I'm an automated assistant and I'll help you. And at first I thought, oh, crikey, it's going to be like the telephone, press 1 for this and 2 for that. And I'll end up with a choice there isn't a number for. But that, I think we've got used to those chatbots for really basic customer service, like, I'm missing this month's bill or whatever, or bill twice, easy stuff. So I think, things like everyone knows how much pain it is doing a podcast and editing it. And so like with the audiobook, it's that the investment to get the book done as an audiobook is about £1,500. And if I got it done with 11 Labs with my voice, which managed to pick up my East Midlands accent eventually, that's going to cost me like $30. So it's like, do I say to people, read it on, use your Kindle and read it on Alexa? Or do you, do I pay 30 quid and get it? Oh, she's woken up now. Sorry. Or do it, do it with 11 Labs or sit there and record it and then have to edit all the bloopers out that you do at the end of the chapter when you're tired. So I'm, for things like a podcast, I might do an audio version just for the people who like to listen and just sort of say, yes, it's my 11 Labs voice because I haven't got time to research what goes into this and make it and edit it and everything. So it's either accept it's 11 Labs or don't listen. That's up to you. And I think I might start with something like that because it's not critical. And I certainly say all my website content is written because I'm by no stretch of the imagination. The copywriting drives me absolutely potty. I can't stand it. Just be factual. Rich doesn't really sell anything, So I have to delegate that because the red mist comes down and I think I've got to spend another day doing this because website's never finished. I know I'm going to be redoing it again. And so I say to people, if you want to see an example of my work, go there.
Right.
Go and have a look at the website.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've actually given me some ideas. Like I have some recordings that were done live and there was a lot of background noise. Like my audio editor was just like, I don't know what you want me to do with this, but I pulled it into Premiere and I still can't like get rid of all this background noise. Like it's not a great recording. I don't know if you want to publish it or whatever, but like if I had a sample of I had the transcript. So if the transcript was captured and I could use 11 Labs for my voice and the guest voice, I could basically recreate. But I would be transparent about exactly what I did. I mean, I don't know that anyone would notice or care necessarily, but I would feel better knowing that, I had to do some surgery and rebuild this conversation because it was there were a couple of them and they were good conversations. I mean, they're worth sharing if I can clean them up, right? So I'm thinking about that as I think about my next in-person event coming up next month at HR Tech in Vegas, and I may encounter some of the same challenges with background noise. So we'll see.
And I think people know that everyone's using AI to quite a high level. And I've been using M dashes since 2012, and I'm going to carry on using them because I don't like using ellipsis because it's 3 dots and it doesn't work very well on the Kindle compared to 3 full stops, and it always got swapped. So I started using M dashes, and I'm going to carry on. And I think if that's the biggest point somebody's got to complain about something I've generated, it's got an M dash in it, then I'll live with that quite easily. It's better than being ignored. Nobody reads your stuff because it's really boring. So I think everyone knows we're using it and we're going to have to be honest about it. And like I did and put it in the start of the book, it's only 8 sentences, but golly, it hurts. But I think we might as well, I think the people who own up to it will probably be more respected than the people who pretended they weren't doing it anymore. I think I'm dabbling with this week and I made this blog post. What do you think? And you can kind of preface it with your expertise and then show what you can make. Because there's some tasks that we're really not very good at, and I don't want people to lose the opportunity to delegate them because they don't want to look like they've used AI to make something they're not. If it was if you've got to do public speaking or something like that, why not have somebody structure it like a TEDx coach to make your talk really good? What's wrong with that? I don't see any problem with that at all. And you could talk about that when before your appearance, say, I'm refining this, I'm shaping this with an AI audience member. Great.
I think this is where a lot of people are just not sure, and maybe they stop in their tracks because they're not sure where that line is, right, between what is authentically me. Because there's always going to be critics that say, or purists, right, that say like, well, look, I want to hear from your brain, and these should be your thoughts, and whatever mistakes and all, it should be authentically yours. But at the same time, it's like, look, if I can present the best version of me, well, it's still very much me. But if I can present a slightly better, more polished version, like how much is okay? Am I supposed to keep track of how much? Do I have to count the words and sentences of what I write, of what AI may have contributed to, if the main thoughts, if the story is authentic and it's mine, and I'm just trying to tell it better so that I can, yes, of course, sell more books, but to have it resonate better with more people or whatever. I mean, at what point is it okay? Is it 5%? Is it 10? So I think people are justifiably not sure how much is okay, and maybe that'll change over time, because right now we are still in the early innings, as we say here in the States. But I feel like, we'll get through this together. But in certain use cases right now, you absolutely are expected to not use AI at all. I'm thinking about, like, my daughter's she already is starting to write her college essays to apply to schools this fall. And yeah, no, my personal opinion is that there's a place for it in the early stages as far as like brainstorming, but the rest of it, once you start writing.
Hey everybody, Tim Sackett, host of HR Famous, a new podcast on the Work Defined Network. Am I famous? No, I'm HR famous. My wife says I'm a micro celebrity, and 13 HR ladies around the world want their picture with me, which I think is funny. So, hey, what do we talk about on the pod? We talk about all the dumb stuff we do in HR in any given day, week, month, and we have fun with it, and we have some great guests. Come check us out. We're not famous. We're HR famous.
It's you, and every word is yours. And as a parent, I'm not touching it, right? I don't even want to give the potential, appearance that someone who's non-human or above the age of 17 has dabbled in there at all. So I'm very sort of conscious of those kinds of scenarios. But even in, if I flip over to the talent space, I mean, this is a sort of a pseudo controversial, or at least debatable topic around like using AI in interviews. I personally think that, if you've requested some type of accommodation, then let's talk about that, and let's dig into what kind of accommodation that you need. But if unless you're told otherwise, it just should be common sense to me that, this is a human to human conversation, and I want to know how your brain works. I expect you to use AI for a variety of use cases, and you'll hopefully use it if you get hired here. But right now, let's focus on you and how you think and how you lead teams and how you collaborate and how you resolve conflict and how you problem solve, and all these, innately human, skills. That's what we're evaluating here. So yeah, so if you've got a second screen where you've got your co-pilot for the interview. I'm not okay with that. Some people think that's okay because it's just helping you be more polished, just like you used it to spruce up your CV. I just think because it's two very different things. The CV is a marketing document, right? Two-dimensional one at that. And so, you're going to need more than the resume to hire somebody. Well, let's figure out what they've done that's not on the resume. Let's think about all the things that are going to make them successful when they get here. So we increase the quality of hire and the quality of our pipeline. And so, yeah, so then you get into sort of a slippery slope. But I'm happy to have those debates because, I'm learning as I go as well. Maybe there's some scenarios that I'm not thinking about, and maybe my comfort level with that kind of thing will grow over time. I just think, I believe in fairness, and I just don't know that there's a difference between being resourceful and just sort of being sneaky,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, definitely.
I was
Yeah.
curious about your experiences with some of your clients. Like, I imagine you help companies like on different parts of the world. I was curious if you see any, patterns in terms of like the geographies and whether people are more sensitive to like legislation and being responsible in the EU, for example, versus like the US or other parts of the world.
Yeah, as somebody who's not in the US, it does feel like theirs is a lot looser, where they want as little restriction as possible because there's an arms race on, and that's what you want to do. In the UK, it probably takes 2 years to make a decision. I think we started deciding in 2023, so we're in danger of actually coming to a conclusion soon about that. Nobody's really, certainly regular people aren't really thinking about it. Barclays might be thinking about it. HSBC might be thinking about it. But the people I meet who are just running regular businesses, they don't really think about regulation at all. It's never on the national news or anything like that. It's not really mentioned. I went to London Tech Week about 8 weeks ago, and they were all talking about Amazon and Microsoft all giving everybody co-pilots to make them better coders and better decision makers. And they didn't have a problem with it at all. They were extolling it, probably because they're hosting the platforms and make money out of it. But, they were sort of saying that it was fine. So I've not really come across, anything particular that's a hot topic that people are talking about with it. I have looked to the EU rules, and I've uploaded them because there's 115 pages of legalese, not for the faint-hearted. Yeah. And some of the things are like, how did this machine make its decision? So if we think about the US law, the US legal system use of AI and their bias in the judgments and everything. So they're sort of saying, well, you've got to prove where this decision has come from, and you're going to have to sort out that problem. So I think, and given that, the EU did GDPR first and now everybody else has had to follow that's chosen to, and not the Wild West, then I can imagine a lot of those principles are going to get carried across everywhere. If if companies, like lobbying governments like it, they'll find ways around it like they do with everything else. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot going on in the US right now. At least, states are moving forward with, some of their proposed legislation, and there's been some things that have been implemented and are active, laws in different states as it is. Actually, even New York City, in my neck of the woods, there's some laws there, but we'll see. I mean, the federal government, they're not going to respond kindly, I imagine, to states that try to be too restrictive, right? That's not going to jive well with their philosophy around letting more innovation thrive.
It might go a bit more like, using plastic packaging. If we waited forever for the government to say use less less, it's just never. And the food lobbyist would just say, no, we can't use that. I'll have to change our production lines. And now people just buy things in, they voted with their wallets and their feet going, right, I'm going to go to this place because it came in a plastic, cardboard box on the plastic box. That's what I'm going to do. And I think people might go to different companies that have got different ethical standards in the same way. I don't see that as a big leap. So I think it'll be people voted. It'll be the court of public opinion that will probably bring the rules in fastest, I think, rather than legislature.
Counting on it, honestly. Because, well, I mean, I've been talking about it for a while in terms of like I would say like we're all responsible for responsible AI. But like even I think about this a lot in the talent space, just because maybe there's some smaller players who are getting away with stuff because they don't think they're going to be on the government's, radar, or they don't have the hiring volume that would draw attention, or just the probability is, the risk is lower. But I do think, as I think about like ecosystems, like I think about the talent and HR tech, ecosystem, knowing that you have a solution that's been audited for adverse impact, those kinds of things are going to be, they're going to have value, and those are the kinds of questions that are going to be asked in the RFI, RFP kind of process when you're doing vendor evaluations. And so for a certain period of time, I do think that will be a differentiator, and that's going to elevate everyone else's game to say, okay, well, these other, ATS, vendors, or these other interview intelligence tools or whatever have been audited. Well, now, like, I guess I need to do that too. So there's an investment that's going to need to be made on the vendor side, so that excuse me, so that you're establishing like a new level of trust with that vendor. And I just think that is going to be important. But as I think about concept more broadly, way beyond the talent ecosystem, and just, societally, and even into the education systems, right? Like schools here in the US are still, so when I say schools, I mean like K-12, not university, but schools are still figuring out what their policy, should be. And so I think it's going to be important for solutions in that space to have some type of, accountability and checks,
Yeah.
in place in the absence of that. So there's always a balance that you need to maintain in this. I refer to it as responsible innovation, right? You can innovate. You just have to be careful while you're doing so. And we went through this with cyber, and we went through this with data privacy, and we have to go through it again with AI, and then we may have to go through it again with something else. Maybe, I don't know, quantum or whatever else we'll talk about in a few years or decade. So yeah, I think there's a lot to think about, and whatever legislation you're paying attention to, there's still that, court of public opinion and the reputational risk that you need to understand. So, Colette, I know you mentioned MindPal, was it?
Yes.
Was one of your
Mind
tools?
Pal. Yeah.
Were there anything else that catches your attention in a positive or negative way?
I think for corporate listeners, I think Manus is a really good tool for creating things like presentations and PDF giveaway brochures and stuff like that. It's been trained to understand what slides look like, and you can edit them in PowerPoint when it's finished, and they're really, really good. So you can give it, you could probably give it an annual report and say, let's make this into something we could do for 20 minutes, and people make it to the end. It would do a really good job of that and make it look nice. And so I've quite enjoyed Manus for doing big, meaty tasks with a hell of a lot of grunt work in them. So it was my thing to start with, and then let's make this into a micro course or whatever. And it's been really, 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 really good at that. That's been my favorite for big tasks.
Manus, MANUS?
MANUS. Yeah,
Okay.
and it can create lots of different output formats as well, which is nice. So it's got a bit of extra flexibility there.
Oh, that's really cool.
I've got you get a certain amount of tokens for the month, and when you first start using it, it's like, whoa, they've got eaten up pretty quickly. And then afterwards, you kind of, all right, I won't run that query again because it's huge, and you get to know where it is. But you can always buy a few top-up ones for 1 month if you burn it, and it's like $20 or $35 for the slightly higher level. It's not lots, if you just try it out for a month and see if you like it, it's the price of a takeaway. So yeah, it's pretty good. So I do like that one and I think for corporates, that would be quite a nice fit for when you've got to do that big presentation and you think, how am I going to dress this up and make it vaguely interesting? Manus will do that for you.
Yeah, I'm going to check that out. I spend time in Canva, which I know isn't like natively, it's got AI built in, but it's not necessarily AI native. But I use that. I've used Gamma before to just convert text to some basic slides, though I haven't used that in a while. But yeah, as I think about some of the digital assets that I want to have to like promote the show, you and I talked about that before. Like, just as part of my own sort of workflow, I want to be able to.
I think it could make Manus could make a nice little digest of a show and make it look like it's in Gamma, but it's it's made it for you, or at least like pulled out the interest in, the bits or the main segments or whatever you want to get it to pull out. It will do that for you. That might be quite a nice thing to do. So I'm enjoying that one. I did have a bit of a wobble with ChatGPT 5, like a lot of people, because I've enjoyed building a personality into Sheldon. This isn't Sheldon, but some people say, is that Sheldon? No, it's not. And I've enjoyed building this sort of curmudgeonly personality into him, and it's been fun. And then when the new model came out, all that kind of personality was gone and it lost its bedside manner. People go, this thing isn't a therapist. Well, no, but it could have a nice bedside manner. It could be polite, like when you get a server at the coffee station and they're a bit brusque, and then you get somebody who goes, oh, enjoy your drink. I want the enjoy your drink barista, please. And so everyone was up in arms this week. And fortunately, it's just started coming back. And I saw an interview with Sam Altman. I think he was talking to the Federal Reserve and some of the financial people. And he was saying he's got quite worried about this thing being a bit more of a wingman, a bit actually being a real listener, somebody who will actually listen to you and not shut you down. And he said, I never really wanted it to be that, and relying on it for too many decisions could be about what happens when you don't feel you can make any decisions without it. So some of the young people now, it's like, who am I going to go out with, or where shall I go on holiday? They ask ChatGPT first. And he said, well, what happens if the president has to ask has to ask ChatGPT, what should I do with this decision? And he's thinking, I never really wanted it to do that. I just wanted it to be knowledgeable and helpful, not this kind of really important crutch that, part of me, if I put my tinfoil hat on, I might think, I wonder if that's why it lost a lot of its personality. And then, of course, everyone's gone, but we like the bedside manner, we like the chatting, and just tone it down a little bit in case anybody does something dodgy with it. But please let us have our personalities back. And that was the biggest gripe. It had lost its personality. So
yeah, I know. I mean, since ChatGPT 5 came out, I've only used it a couple of times, so I didn't notice as much difference as some other folks like you, and so obviously I'll give it some more tries. I did hear that they brought 4.0 and some of the other ones back for plus users.
And I think when it was first made, the reason why it's really good is that it will, because people don't understand what's the right model to use for your query. You might go, you go and ask philosophy PhD student how to do something, and actually a quiz show contestant would have given you the right answer a lot quicker. And so everyone was going to the most complicated model, and it was using a lot of resources that weren't needed. So the goal was to send it to the best place that it would answer your query. But I think it just went to the most basic one. With whatever you were asking, it went to the 2 + 2 = 4 kind of model. And that's why a lot of people, if you were always just doing basic stuff, like tell me 3 places to visit in New York, you wouldn't notice it was broken. But if you were doing something else, it was very painful at the time. But they've fixed it in, a rapid amount of time, which is really good.
Yeah.
And they put the expensive things back in.
Right. Well, it's also like, I think it was Sam Altman himself who said 4.0 or model 03 or whatever it was is like talking to a college graduate, and ChatGPT 5 is like talking to a PhD graduate. And it's like, does the average person need or want to talk to a PhD student for just like average queries? So it just seems like to give that one to everyone, I don't know. I mean, if I were to anthropomorphize that model, like who wants to have a normal everyday, conversation? Even if you're doing research, do you need that level? I mean, hopefully college graduates are reasonably intelligent and answer a lot of questions. I don't know. I don't know all the details that went into it, but I do. Once again, there's a balance, right? Like maybe there is another option, unless it knows enough about like when to deploy which model for what, and how do I sort of parse out the prompt and maybe have different models working simultaneously, and then bringing the answer back. But there's also, from a user perspective, there has definitely been fatigue in terms of, okay, do I have to keep switching the model as I go through and try to use this tool to help me solve a problem or rewrite something or whatever. Like that's a lot of there's a mental sort of toll there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, another level of complexity for the new people that they could really do without. 2 models, okay. When you had like 6, it's like, whoa. So, and then you'd probably get it wrong and you'd be benched for like 2 weeks because you can only do that 20 times in a month or something. Like, oh no.
Yeah.
But I was just getting started down the wrong track and you've killed me off.
Yeah. Right. Well, even that, I mean, even the scenario we were just describing, I mean, that's still within one frontier model, right? Like if you are someone who plays with different models for different reasons, that's a whole nother thing. It's like if you were, I'll use a baseball analogy again, sorry. But like imagine if you were like a coach and you were sending somebody new up to bat, like you now have to pick between, imagine having to pick between players on your team and players on other teams. Like who's the best person to go up to bat at this particular moment? So it's almost like, I don't know, maybe it's like if you were managing an all-star team and so you're only familiar with your own players, but you've got all these other great players from other teams that you don't really know as well or something, and you just have to decide. So again, there's some decision fatigue that happens, and you just want to go into one, rich text window or
Yeah.
one, voice prompt, and you just
Yeah.
want to talk or write, and
Yeah.
just please give me the best response possible.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Well, Colette, this has been fantastic. I'm sure there's a million other topics we could keep
Yeah.
talking about, but I want to be respectful of your time. Yeah, this has been great. So yeah, thank you for joining me and sharing your insights with my audience. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Loved it. Thank you very much.
I will put obviously your contact information and a link to your book in the show notes of this episode. And yeah, like I said, it's been great having you.
Great. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next time.